Alright, in this example, we are going to be taking a look at a few different endgames. So let's get into it. It is white to move in this position. We are being checked. That is a fact. So, do you move the king? Or do you play rook f4? Why or why not? Well, if you said rook f4 because, hey, if I traded rooks, it's a drawn king and pawn endgame. No, my friend, you are wrong. Rook f4 runs into king g5. And now black has the opposition, and if you go back a few videos in our series, you see how having the opposition in this position is crucial, and black actually wins. So, back to our starting position, not rook f4, but king g3. Absolutely critical in the position to play. Now, black needs to make progress with the pushing of his pawn. So, king g5. And I like the idea of waiting. There's no reason to rush. We can't force anything with white. I'm just going to try to keep his king away. And this is a concept that happens in a lot of king and rook endgames that I think players who haven't studied a lot of king and rook endgames get hung up on. They're like, okay, I know I need to check his king to get him back. So I need to move my rook. My rook is close to my king. That's not good. He doesn't have a lot of flexibility. So I have a lot of options for the rook. We can go to any of these squares. Which one is best and why? The a5 square is best because it has the most distance from the opposing king, and it's a term checking distance. Silman uses along with a number of other authors. So you got that checking distance. Now rook b3 is trying to stop you. Well, the opposition is keeping the black king from moving forward. The rook is protecting, so we can't really come up and bother him. Black has the time to push the pawn. Well, we really don't have a way to prevent this process from continuing. So let's try to check from the other side. And notice what black is going to do here. First, he goes king f4. Well, he left himself open for check. So we're going to go right back. We're happy to make a draw here, if we're allowed to. Next, he plays the better move, king g4. Well, if I check from here, you can hide and you've made progress. If I check from here, you push the pawn and you've made progress. Now this is a critical position. I'm going to give you two options. King g1 or rook b8. Choose wisely. All right. Let's first take a look at why king g1 loses. So king g1, king g3. We're threatening mate, and it's a bishop pawn. It does make a big difference. There's rook b1, f3. Well, you can't leave the back rank with the rook, so all you can do is go back and forth. And with this passive position, you lose the rook, and with it the game. Typically, if you go passive in endgames, you lose. That's a pretty solid rule. You don't want to go passive. If it was in this position, if this pawn was a knight pawn or a rook pawn, you could just move the rook back and forth, and there is no way for black to make progress. It's a draw. But with the bishop pawn, we have the theme that we saw in the game, and white loses. So let's come back to this critical moment. where I asked you, would you play king g1 or rook b8? Rook b8 is the better move, and we're going to get the Philidor endgame from this. So check. Now he's threatening mate, right? Well, we got to stop that. Check yourself. And then, again, flexibility and checking distance. Rook b8. It's the furthest move away I can get, and I'm leaving myself open for either direction. Flexibility is key in most of chess. So rook a3 stops me. All right. I still like my rook here. I mean, you could do that, but we got a king too. He can move. So I don't want to go to f1 where I get mated. So short side of the board. King f2. Go away. Yeah, I'll check you all day. Keep going to f1. I'll go right back. See, I want flexibility in defense. So check. King g3, what would you do? Go back. And if rook g2, he's threatening mate. Happy to repeat the position, staying flexible. King g4. I'll pass. And this is one of the keys. I mean, honestly, probably the best move here is rook b3, saying that the king can't go any further up. That will force him to push the pawn to make progress, and then this is the critical position, because now I come back to b8, and the king can no longer, when the pawn was here, hide in front of it. So this is the key to the Philidor position. Once he goes here, I can check forever. And the game is a draw. There's nowhere for the king to hide. So, Philidor, from a technically drawn rook and pawn position, we hit a few key themes there. When it's okay to passively defend, staying flexible, and checking distance. So hopefully you got a little bit out of this rook and pawn endgame. Join us for the next endgame adventure.